Welcome everybody. We're going to start in just about a minute or two. I know people are trickling in now. So before we start in a minute or two, just to let folks join, feel free to get familiar with the Zoom webinar settings. We have a chat panel where we encourage you to engage, ask questions, discuss, maybe share a joke, whatever you're looking to do in the chat, but we'll be monitoring that as we go. There is a Q&A panel too. That one's a little bit harder for me personally to see as I'm sharing the screen, but feel free to use the chat. We have about 30 minutes, a little less than that now. We'll start in about a minute just to keep it really tight on this topic. But again, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll start very, very soon. And this is being recorded. I will say that again probably, and we'll probably type it in the chat panel. And yeah, excited for everyone to be here. So if anyone has video or audio issues with me or my colleague Jimmy, who's presenting as well, or you can't see the screen, also type in chat panel. We'll see what we can do about that before we get started, but we'll give it another 30 seconds. Jimmy, you can hear me, right?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Okay. Again, hello and welcome everyone that might have just popped in. I guess we can probably start now. I think it's 2 after. So welcome everybody to this webinar today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're dialing in from. We're so excited to have you to talk about Google Analytics 4, the future of analytics for Google, and specifically the question that's come up a number of times over the last several months. Will I lose data moving from Universal Analytics, the current Google Analytics, to GA4? We're happy to be here to talk through this. Again, just a little bit of logistics. Feel free to type in the chat panel if you have questions or comments as we go. A little bit easier for us to monitor than the Q&A. So the chat panel is there. It is recorded, this session. It will be available afterwards, and we'll try to leave some time for questions at the end, but also feel free to ask as we go. My name is Amin Shaki. I am the VP of Client Services here at Infotrust. I have my colleague, Jimmy Love, who's a strategist team lead here as well. We both work closely with a lot of our partners and clients around Google Analytics, digital analytics, and specifically GA4. So we're excited to be here with all of you today. Just a quick 30 seconds about Infotrust. We are a end-to-end digital analytics partner and consulting company. We have several certifications and several offices in Dubai, Cincinnati. These are the posters behind me, though I'm in Chicago myself, and a number of others. And we provide analytics expertise. We don't sell media. We have our own proprietary platforms for data governance and data validation, and really love talking about digital analytics and all things in that space. So today we'll be talking about GA4, and we're uniquely certified with Google across several platforms to be able to talk about this topic. So that's a little bit about us. And a bit more about what we do. Again, I won't spend too much time, but if this is the first time you're getting introduced to us, when we partner with our clients, we like to look at our engagements as a journey to go through analytics maturity together, going from crawl, walk, run, and some of the usage and capabilities around digital analytics. These are some of the services that we provide. It's not comprehensive. We do much more, but this is generally the areas that we play in. And we even have a book. So shameless plug, Crawl, Walk, Run. Get your copy on Amazon today. I think it's $1 only, and all proceeds go to charity anyway. And it's a really great read for how we approach digital analytics and all the changes coming in the industry. So for today's agenda, we're going to start with the question, the whole topic of today's webinar: why GA4, and is there data loss when moving or between Universal Analytics and GA4? We're going to talk about dual tagging, why to start now, some of the use cases and pain points that GA4 solves for, and how Infotrust can help if you're looking to get started or continue if you've already started, and how to expand upon that. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Jimmy to take us through the big question.
The big question. Thanks, Amin. So yeah, that big question, will you lose your data migrating from UA to GA4? Amin, next slide. No, High level, no data will be lost as long as you kind of follow some of the advice that we're going to go through here. Taking a really quick step back down memory lane, since 2005, when Google originally acquired Urchin, there have been 4 core iterations of Google Analytics, with GA4 being the latest and greatest. Most of you are familiar with Universal Analytics. You could almost kind of refer that to as like GA3, and that's the most popular version being used today. It's key to note that GA4 is a completely new property. It's a completely new data collection model. That's why no data should be lost, because you should keep Universal Analytics alongside of GA4 and dual tag. So if nothing else, that's the one key takeaway from today's webinar. If you aren't already, dual tag your entire website with both Universal Analytics and GA4, so you can begin collecting that historical data in GA4 properties for future month-over-month and year-over-year analysis. Next slide.
I clicked that fast enough. Yeah.
Next slide, please. So, clearly GA is evolving. Universal Analytics emphasized page views and screen views and metrics like bounce rate. Firebase first introduced the concept of events and their associated parameters, and that is entirely what GA4 will use. With GA4, you can kind of forget the concept of page views. Page views will now just be a type of event. And music to my ears, forget the concept of bounce rate. That is now going to be a new metric called engaged sessions. And keep in mind, parameters are very key. They'll still allow you to customize all of the events, including that very important page event. So as you can kind of tell, these are some huge changes. But once you understand why Google made these changes and some of the flexibility that these changes will offer, I think you'll get as excited as we are here at Infotrust, and I think you'll start thinking of Universal Analytics as a platform of the past. So, here's an example, just to kind of break things down. Let's say you're an auto dealership, you want to track a user searching for a car. With Universal Analytics, we would use a very basic event. We'd have a category, action, and a label. And then you might also fire a handful of custom dimensions, maybe even some custom metrics, in this case, custom dimensions, with very carefully selected scopes, like hit scoped and user scoped. In GA4, we would replace that with an event name here being car search, and you'd have a handful of parameters, and then notably one single user property. And that will basically replace the need for all of these different scoped dimensions, and the parameters give you a ton of flexibility. I mentioned user properties will kind of replace that user scoped custom dimension example in this slide of member type. In this case, just to give a quick background on a user property, they are attributes that can be used to define segments of your user base. Examples being member type, geographic location, or language preferences. So quick definition of user properties, just since that is part of this slide. And next slide, I think we're basically already ready to talk about dual tagging. Again, today's webinar is only 30 minutes, so it's meant to be pretty high level, but I do think we're going to really touch on some of the key parts of whether or not you lose your data, dual tagging, and then of course, as Amin mentioned, we'll talk about the value GA4 brings after dual tagging. But first, we'll start with dual tagging. So what are your first steps? First step is you need to create an implementation plan. On the short term, you're going to want to set up dual tagging on all pages. So creating that GA4 property in the Google Analytics interface, adding data streams for the web and or mobile application that you want to track in your new GA4 property. And then of course, implementing that GA4 tag. There's 2 options there. You can either hard code the tag or implement through a tag management system, such as Google Tag Manager. A tag management system is pretty much always going to be my recommendation if you can avoid making hard-coded changes and bypass the need to loop in development partners or your development team internally. That's always a win in my book. And then since we don't want to lose any data for now, be sure you leave the existing data layer as it is if you do have a data layer. This is especially important if you're an e-commerce website, using the data layer to pass e-commerce events to a universal analytics property. And as far as the last thing is short term, now is really the time to at least begin thinking about or even begin mapping your data collection from Universal Analytics to GA4. Beginning to map the events and CDs, custom dimensions, to GA4 events, GA4 parameters, GA4 user properties, and GA4 custom dimensions, which are still a thing. Long term, we will of course want to begin looking at a robust GA4 replacement implementation and an updated data layer using the new GA4 event model.
Yeah, and Jimmy, just one thing I want to also chime in here for some of the implementation short term, depending how it's deployed today, like Jimmy mentioned, if you have a tag management system, that actually might make it a lot easier and faster. If you're using gtag.js, the code right now for Universal Analytics or for Floodlight or Google Ads, the other Google products, there might be even easier ways to deploy GA4 without heavy development tool lift or development team needed, which I think we might talk about. But I just wanted to emphasize there are options there. You can check out our website or reach out to us if you're curious what are the most simple options versus what is right long-term, because there are some differences. And then the mapping data collection, I also want to just say, the previous slide that Jimmy showed is essentially what we're talking about here, but we do have examples of this, I believe, on our website, or will soon, because it's referenced in our book, shameless plug number 2, around our mapping format or template that you can use. But of course, work with your teams or partners or us if you're an existing client joining today. We can show you our mapping process if we haven't already. So.
Yeah, excellent. And a question actually came in. Happy to kind of address them as we go. We built in time for questions during the presentation and Q&A at the end. So a question came in. Do you recommend using GA4 if your tag management system is not Google Tag Manager? So, Telium or Insighten? The answer is definitely yes. You should. That is, when I said TMS, I definitely was referring to TMS agnostic. So whether it's GTM, Telium, Insighten, maybe Amin, off the top of your head if Telium has a template tag for GA4, but whether like GTM does, where you instead of pasting the entire G tag into a custom HTML tag, you can paste it into a GA4 template tag, just pasting in the little measurement ID. To my knowledge, I don't think Telium has a template tag, but it's still just as easy. You create a custom HTML tag, copy paste the entire G tag, set it to all pages, and you're done. And 100% great question, but please implement GA4 dual tagging regardless of your TMS. And if you don't use a TMS, a tag management system, then of course hard code it on all pages, but seriously consider a TMS.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Jimmy, I think you're right. From our partners that have Telium, we have a number of them. I don't think there's a GA4 official template tag. There's maybe a community created tag, but most of our partners already use GTag or other template tags for the Floodlight or Google Ads, like I mentioned. So there are ways that you can include GA4 within that. That's actually one effort Google's trying to do, is because they have all these different technologies, but they all integrate, between Campaign Manager, DV360, Google Ads, and Google Analytics. From a tagging perspective, they tried to simplify. So there are options where, if you're using Telium, for example, I know some of our other partners using Telium or Adobe Launch, they already have GTag for Floodlight and Google Ads. We were able to add in GA4 tagging just by one line or a few additional tweaks to that single tag versus a net new tag or waiting for a template. If there is a template with your tag management system, theoretically, that means it's been vetted and tested by that vendor. So, we often recommend using that, such as Google Tag Manager, to Jimmy's point. But there are options if you're using a different TMS and have GTag with your other platforms. I imagine most people on the call probably have Google Ads at least running for paid search. So that's an option there you can explore.
Cool. Next slide, please. And that actually really segues. I think this is the next slide. Yeah, we kind of covered this basically. Really segued nicely into this. If you're using a TMS like GTM, process is incredibly easy, and in other TMSs as well. I mentioned at Site and Atelian being some of the other bigger players. If not, there is a source code requirement where you'll ask your development partner or your internal IT development team to deploy it hard-coded on all pages, deploying the G tag. And of course, like I mentioned, for long-term and for more advanced tracking, there will be some effort by your development team due to the updated data layer required for GA4. And then the last thing that we did not cover yet on this slide is for mobile app users, because Google Analytics is deprecating software development kits, otherwise known as SDKs. Most mobile applications should already be using Firebase plus probably GTM to send data to Universal Analytics. And therefore, it's already in a great position to begin using GA4 with minimal development assistance. So anything to add there, Amin?
Yeah, just because I literally just did this yesterday for one of our partners, where if you're using Firebase Analytics, if you already have it in your app, most I feel of our partners have or are considering, to turn on the data flow to GA4, it's within the settings, within the Firebase UI. So GA4 is kind of embedded in the Firebase Analytics SDK. So when you deploy Firebase Analytics into your app, GA4 is ready to go via the configuration settings in the UI of the Firebase project and console. So yeah.
Perfect. And with that, I'm actually going to transition things back over to Amin, who is going to discuss some of the value you can expect to get out of this shiny new GA4 product we've been talking about.
Thank you, Jimmy. I'll try to spend just 5-ish minutes on 5 to 10 minutes on the value. Some of this we've already explained in previous webinars or content on our site, but I wanted to boil it down to some of the key use cases that we have seen or talked with our partners as far as the why to start with GA4 and why to use it in the future, given it is going to be the future of analytics. And one thing I just want to clarify is that Universal Analytics is still going to be considered or should be considered the source of truth if you're using it for this year. But beyond this year, what we've heard from Google is that GA4 needs to become the source of truth as your main platform, which is why to dual tag now, get that historical data collected so that it can be an easier transition. Updates right now by Google, if you see and receive those alerts, it's all around GA4. There's very little updates or upgrades happening to Universal Analytics. It'll be maintained from what we see, but GA4 is the focus. And that's what I'll talk about today, is some of the updates and features within the tool. The way I structured some of the use cases here is a pain point and how GA4 is a solution for it. So one is just finding answers from data. It can be overwhelming. It can take time. There's a lot of reports, lots of great stuff in Universal Analytics. With GA4, there's going to be both structured reporting, if that's appropriate for your organization based on your culture and how you have governance in place, but also flexibility. So you can build custom reports easier with more ability to slice and dice it however you wish, particularly because of the event-based model. So the screenshot here is showing the analysis hub. This is part of the flexible reporting that's built right into the GA4 interface. Whereas today with Universal, the custom reports are somewhat limiting, and most of the time our partners export out to look at the dashboarding visualization tools like Data Studio. You can still do that with GA4, but now there's even more capability right in the UI. There's also some governance features coming to GA4 where central users can actually choose which reports, metrics, and data to allow users to see. Where today with Universal, if you have read and analyze access, you see all the same reports as anyone else that has read and analyze. With GA4, you can customize by user role what reports and data they see. A lot more control, a lot more governance capabilities, again, to keep it flexible yet structured. User pathing reports is one report that we're very excited that GA4 has and is being rolled out. That is kind of a pain point with Universal Analytics, but I'll show a screenshot of that here right now in this slide. So these are the improved pathing reports and analysis. Currently with Universal, based on how the data models set up, it's difficult to use the user flow or event flow reports and highly sampled. These are a lot more powerful, faster to render, easier to tweak because of the event-based model that allows a lot faster and robust analysis and customization. Another pain point and solution is to do advanced analysis or predictive analytics or machine learning or anything like that today usually requires excessive ETL, exporting data out of GA and GMP into a cloud instance like GCP, running some modeling, some assessments analysis, and then coming up with your insights and activating it there. GA4 is going to have built-in robust machine learning, AI, predictive analytics type of metrics and reports. And a lot of it will be available for targeting as well. So this is really improved. And one of Google's focuses org-wide is to use data to automatically provide insights versus manual manpower to assess and analyze. I do see a question come in, so I'll see if I can take it. I think it might be multiple questions. For GA4, can it change the way your existing universal analytics comes in with all else staying the same? Cross-domain tracking is easier with GA4. So I think to summarize the answer, and let me know if I don't get it, just trying to summarize here. Google Analytics 4 is a completely separate property. So there's not really a connection between universal analytics and the data that you have tracking today with the new property that you'll create with GA4. So any configuration that you have with universal analytics today will remain. So if you have cross-domain tracking, if you have integrations in and out between GA and other systems, or any custom events or anything like that with universal, it'll remain. GA4 is kind of net new. It'll be a net new property, net new deployment with events. If you have integrations with universal today, with your I don't know, backend systems or your dashboarding tools, those will have to actually be recreated with GA4 because again, it's a net new property, net new system, essentially. So if I understood the question correctly here, universal analytics will not be affected as you start rolling out GA4. Jimmy, keep me honest here if anything needs to be clarified. But for the most part, it is a separate, essentially a separate tag, separate piece of code that's going to be deployed to your site, if you will, or to your apps through the Firebase Analytics.
Yeah, I mean, I think the follow-up was mostly like if I need to add updated container code or a second container. So first of all, definitely don't recommend a second container. Regardless of your TMS, you just want to have one container. It will be a second tag that you will need to publish. But once again, don't update the data layer. You're just publishing a net new tag from a net new property. And you'll have zero data loss, historical, present, future with universal analytics. I think that summarizes Marianne's question. Another one that came in from the vMedia team was, this is kind of back about the Firebase piece, which I know, I mean, you just said you just implemented for a client. Is it recommended to use Firebase in addition to GTM with GA4?
Great question. So GTM within the mobile apps is very valuable for universal analytics and for other tags. There are some capabilities within Google Tag Manager for apps to modify some of the events that might be coming or set up within the Firebase Analytics SDK. But from our experience, that's not used very often. So using Firebase Analytics, which is an SDK directly in your app, that'll feed the data to GA4. And if you have your tracking done or deployment done upfront, or even as you go in a way that fulfills your reporting needs, you won't need GTM to modify those events. Using GTM is helpful if you need to preserve universal analytics, like you've had universal analytics on the app for a number of years before Firebase Analytics. To keep that going, we do recommend using GTM in the app to deploy universal analytics. And again, GTM can modify Firebase events, aka GA4 events, but not create them or not deploy GA4 through GTM. The only way to actually deploy GA4 on the apps is through Firebase Analytics SDK. GTM can serve as a way to manipulate what's already been deployed potentially if you need to. Again, our experience is that hasn't happened much because we try to get the implementation correct upfront or through some releases. So to answer that, most likely not needed, especially long term as of today, because GA4 is built into Firebase. But there might be some short-term advantages, especially if you have universal analytics still.
And last question that came in, which we'll answer really, I think I can answer really fast just to make sure we stay on track and also leave a minute or two for Q&A at the end. Our company, this is from Jamie, our company uses Adobe as our main analytics tool, not GA. Do you still recommend implementing GA4? My recommendation is absolutely. GA4 is completely free, first of all, so why not? And second of all, there are some advantages to Google over Adobe. Adobe has some advantages over Google as well. GA4 actually, as a means of getting into, is actually addressing some of those advantages that Adobe has, like pathing and things like that. But one advantage of Google, just high level, if you're using Google Ads or any of the Google 360 media platforms like Search Ads, DV, CM, those only have integration. Those have native integrations with Google, and there are certain metrics and goal integrations that you won't really get with Adobe. So just since it's free, since there are a few differences, it's still dual tagging. Instead of comparing your universal analytics data to GA4, you'll be comparing your Adobe Analytics data to GA4. You'll definitely see some differences, which we could go into, but that could be its own entire webinar. So, but back to you, Amin.
Yeah, I'll add one tiny thing there. If you're using GA360, like Universal Analytics and the 360 Enterprise version, there is an opportunity for you to enter into a GA4 Enterprise or 360 beta, and you will not be double charged this year as of now. So you can still try the Enterprise version of GA4 if you're already paying and in the GA360 Enterprise agreement with Universal Analytics. So all of our clients that are GA360 for Universal, we're encouraging them to enter this beta so they can not only try GA4, which is free to Jimmy's point, but the Enterprise paid version as well, because there's a beta and Google's not double charging, even though it's double tagging. So that should be helpful for those that are interested in the Enterprise features, and happy to take that offline if anyone's curious what those Enterprise differences are. I know for some of our partners and clients, we've been talking through that. In the essence of time, I'm going to go a little bit quick through these slides. Again, you'll get the recording afterwards. This is just a quick reference of some of those advanced machine learning or predictive metrics. And then the last big use case I really wanted to talk about is with everything happening in the privacy world between regulations and browser changes and consent. One thing that we've seen is for those organizations that deployed a consent management platform, if a user doesn't consent to allow cookies, some of our clients, particularly those in Europe, just don't send data to GA at all, which effectively removes completely any visibility into those users. With consent mode and consent mode modeling, that's the GA4 feature, you can be compliant with not tracking cookies or anything about the user, but cookieless data, such as events not tied to a user or anything about them, but just what they've done, purchases they made or pages they've seen, that can be captured. And then Google will run modeling on top of that to fill the gap for those other metrics that are lost otherwise. Session-based metrics, maybe attribution. So again, nothing that's not compliant. There's no user-specific data captured or that can be targeted to a user because they didn't consent. But modeling on top of it fills that gap of otherwise data loss due to not tracking anything if a user doesn't consent. Very powerful feature. Can share more about that in the future. Wanted to end with some next steps. This is kind of a takeaway slide if you're thinking, how do I get started? We broke it out in our crawl, walk, run model for different things you can do to deploy GA4 and then scale it. But Jimmy has a blog post that we posted on this topic, and where I'll end is our resource hub. So on our website, we have more information about GA4, how to get started, some of the reporting, a lot more information. And of course, reach out to us if you have further questions. I think we're going to spin up a survey or a poll here in a second. If you want more info, we can reach out to you or you can reach out to us. But otherwise, thank you so much. Again, I wanted to make sure we're conscious of time, leave maybe 30 seconds, or we can hang on maybe a minute or two for any additional questions. But thanks for joining. Hopefully this was valuable.
I mean, we did get a question come in from Marianne. Does this have any impact on ads data if you link ads to GA4 and or Universal Analytics?
Sure, I can touch on that. The recommendation, because it's dual tagging, GA, Universal, and GA4, also dual linking, and there's no impact linking GA4 to Google Ads as well as Universal to Google Ads. You'll have to note though, once conversion data is being passed between the two, there will be a separate view there, if you will. You want to make sure it depends on how you've set up Universal Analytics versus GA4. If you have different goals, different conversions, and there's different data, you'll want to be mindful of that. But the process and the technology and the capabilities are the same. And you can link both to the same Google Ads to my knowledge. But that's a good question. Shouldn't affect anything with your Universal Analytics setup though.
Correct. And I don't see any other questions. And it is exactly at that 30-minute mark. Well, world record, used the full time without going over. So everyone can make it to their next meeting, or if you're US Eastern time zone like myself, grab yourself a sandwich and enjoy lunch. Amin, anything to close it out?
Let us know if you need help with GA4, and don't be afraid per the slide. I thought this was fun. Thanks everybody. Have a wonderful day.